Universities in North America are on the verge of an apocalyptic terminal collapse. At least that's what you'd have to believe if you go to any bookstore and look under the education section over the last few years. My count is up to 40, I must confess I haven't read them all, books predicting the demise of the modern university. These attacks and critiques come from the left, they come from the right, they come from inside academia, they come from outside academia. Everybody's very worried about the future of universities. Some months ago, I actually reviewed 2 of these books for the British science magazine Nature, and I began my review as follows. Universities are fractious places. They're populated by customers, formerly known as students, who pay large amounts of increasingly borrowed money in exchange for very high grades from researchers with large frequent flyer mile accounts, formerly known as professors, who report to real estate developers, formerly known as university presidents. Now that, of course, is a caricature, but as in most caricatures, it has elements of truth. But let me stop right here and put a big asterisk on this whole talk. I am certain that this marvelous institution, which I've visited many times, which has produced my chief academic officer, has none of the problems I will describe today. So just sit there relaxed in observing the turbulence outside of these little sheltered campus that you live on here. Well, why do people think universities are in trouble? Or, if you're a little more pessimistic, why are universities in trouble? I think one of the problems is that universities have taken on or been assigned by society too many tasks. They are supposed to be triggers of urban renewal. They're supposed to be engines of economic growth. They're supposed to cure sick people. They're supposed to train the next generation of scholars. They're supposed to generate new knowledge and spin off the biotech companies that result. They're supposed to supply an endless number of talking heads for the 24/7 news cycle. Now, all of those things, with the possible exception of the talking heads, are social goods, right? Urban renewal is good, and economic development is good, and curing sick people is certainly good, and training scholars is good, and generating knowledge is good. But unfortunately, the way this has evolved over the last century means that by doing all these things, the one thing that most of the institutions, including this one, were founded to do gets left behind, and that's educating undergraduates. Educating in the sense of the Latin root educare, which means to bring up, to rear, but really in the root of that word educare, which means to open up and to lead forth, to open the minds of young people, to recognize where their ideas come from, and to perhaps change them. This is, in my view, a problem. How did we get here? Well, let's start with the professoriate, since that's what I know best. I've been a member of it for 35 years. All right, so we start out to become a professor by getting a PhD. That is well known to be the process by which one learns more and more about less and less until one knows absolutely everything about nothing. In that process, elaborate as it is, often, and in my case completely, there was no mention of pedagogy, of teaching, or of how people learn. When I walked into my first classroom at Columbia in 1977, I had never taught anyone anything. May still be true, but that's a little odd when you train for a profession that is to teach people and you get no education in the process of teaching people in the process. It's weird. Then we have the reward system, which clearly, in most institutions, is heavily skewed towards punishing teaching. I mean, it's in the language we use, right? You all have teaching loads and research opportunities, right? You never have teaching opportunities and research loads. You just have research opportunities and teaching loads. Now, when you're writing your grant proposal renewal at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you know your graduate student and your postdoc are going to starve unless you get it right, research can be a load as well. And in fact, when you find other colleagues who are interested in trying to think of something new to do, like this committee I gather is thinking about, sometimes they get excited. So there are teaching opportunities, but we never talk about the language that way. And finally, we're asked to do these things in an environment of increasingly constrained resources and with pressure to do it more efficiently. My favorite comment on efficiency comes from William Balmol and Bill Bowen, about 50 years ago when they wrote an article, an economics article, and they said, you know, it still takes 4 people 25 minutes to play a Beethoven string quartet, just like it did 200 years ago. Education is not exactly equivalent to playing a string quartet, but it's closer to that than manufacturing diapers. So making it more efficient is something one has to do with, I think, great care. This all combines, this lack of training in teaching, this reward system that punishes teaching, this drive for efficiency, to creating a certain cynicism on both sides of the lectern. I like to call this the commodification of education. And it was driven home to me by an incident a couple years ago at Columbia that I'll relate to you, because I think it sums up so much of what is wrong about what we're doing. When I got to Columbia in 1977, I was delighted to find that Columbia, uniquely Columbia, amongst all the major universities, had retained through the 60s its core curriculum. That the faculty had the temerity to say, these ideas are important, these books are important, every one of you is going to read them in your first 2 years. I don't care what you're going to do after that, this is important. I really liked that. But I was simultaneously appalled that of the 7 courses that make up the core curriculum at Columbia, the intellectual coat of arms of the institution, as it was described in the catalog, it was 7 humanities courses, 0 science courses, 0 social science courses, and 0 mathematics courses. This might have been okay in 1919 when this curriculum was dreamt up, but it didn't strike me as good preparation for the 21st century. Nonetheless, being a young and naive professor, I thought, well, we have this system. We require people to take courses in their first 2 years. I'll just make up math and science courses, and then everything will be fine. 27 years later, I succeeded in adding 1 semester to Columbia's core curriculum. So now it's 8 semesters, 7 humanities courses, which have not changed since 1947, and a new course in science called Frontiers of Science. In that class, we teach, as in the other core classes, in small 20-student seminars. And I was a little discouraged about the lack of interactivity, the lack of collaborative work, the lack of excitement about some of the ideas we were discussing in this class. But I had my 20 students, like everybody else, and we would meet once a week to discuss for 2 hours some new paper, some new topic, some issue on the frontiers of science. This was not a great book science course. And one day, I happened to go and give a talk to a bunch of 4th graders at a school in Manhattan on, the universe. And I talked for maybe 30 minutes, and there were 90 of them in the room. And when I was finished, there were precisely 180 hands in the air. They both had both hands up like this. They had questions. And they went on, and they went on. And 45 minutes later, they were getting dragged out by their shirt collars by the teachers to go to lunch. They were curious. I then got on the bus, went back up to Columbia, walked into my class 5 minutes before class started. 20 students sitting around in a small room. 2 of them are on Facebook, 3 of them are texting, 2 of them are asleep. But the rest of them are sitting there, and they've got their pad at the appropriate angle and their pencil ready to go. And you could just see what was behind their eyes. It was like, okay, in an hour and 55 minutes, this will be over, and 5 more of these in this semester will be over, and I'll be 1/8 of my way to Harvard Law School. And so I looked at them. I have to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to discuss this amazing article. This article was so exciting that one of my colleagues, a Nobel laureate in physics, who was also teaching in this class with me, came running up the stairs with his lap book open and almost bought it on the top step because he was so excited to show us this paper. What they had done was they'd taken a rabbit ovum and they'd spliced in 3 genes from jellyfish. One was a red fluorescent protein, one was a green fluorescent protein. Okay, that's not too exciting. But the clever thing was the 3rd one randomized the expression of the other 2. And they produced 1,500 distinct recognizable colors. And when this rabbit grew up, they could trace neuron by neuron from the retina to the visual cortex, every neuronal connection. They call it the technicolor brain. Just blew me away. I thought this was so cool. So I was really excited. I come back from all these energized 4th graders. I walk in. And so I looked at them and I said, why aren't you more like 4th graders? All right, so they're Columbia freshmen. They have to get their A to get into Harvard Law School. They don't recognize the rhetorical question, so 5 hands go up. I should have known better, but I said, yes. And she said, well, Professor Helfand, you have to understand. When you're in 4th grade, you don't know how much there is to know. And so if you're curious about something, you ask a question. But by the time you get to our age, 17, there's sort of an infinite amount of stuff to know, and it's all on Google anyway, so what's the point of asking a question? The appropriate answer is, what's the point of not shooting yourself? But I didn't say that. I said, oh. Next person's hands in the air. Well, Professor Helfand, you have to understand this is a seminar. And I said, yeah, that's what I thought. That's why we're supposed to talk about things. He said, oh, but you don't understand. I mean, the point of being here is to come out on top. Asking a question is a sign of weakness. So you never ask a question. In a seminar, you only make statements. In a lecture where you're anonymous, you can raise your hand and ask a question, but in a seminar, you only make statements. So this was getting pretty bad. I did call on the next two people, and it didn't get better. And then there was this kid sitting in the front row. And I have to say he was from LA, because I'm from New York and I hate LA. Anyway, he was sitting there watching the whole time in the front row. And he finally puts his hand up. He says, Professor Helfand, I think what you're missing here is I'm paying for a degree, not for an education. Now, you smug little liberal arts college here can say, well, that's arrogant Columbia students. What do you expect? Except I told this story about 3 months later at a meeting of university provosts and presidents and other academic administrators in Calgary. And, you know, they had the same reaction you did, except for the after-dinner talk, they had been clever, and they, rather than having, you know, two other presidents stand up and talk, they had the presidents of the student governments from the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta. And the first one got up to speak, and he said, before I start, I have to say something. Dr. Helfand said something today about, you know, paying for a degree and not for an education. I don't understand what he doesn't get. Of course, that's what we're all doing. And 3 months after that, I went to a meeting of small liberal arts colleges in the northwestern US, sponsored by the Murdoch Trust, where they provide money to get undergraduates involved in research in a meaningful way. And this was a conference where the undergraduates present all their research. But there was a side meeting of all the faculty, and this very distraught woman from one of the, I shall leave it unnamed, liberal arts colleges that you would have heard of in the Northwest stood up and said, you know what a student said to me the other day? He said he was paying for a degree and not for an education. I think this attitude is endemic, and I think it grows out of the cynicism that has grown up around a faculty that is not taught to teach and with a reward system that punishes it for teaching, and instead of students who view education as a commodity that if they purchase it, they'll have a higher than average expected income over the rest of their lifetime. It would obviously be simpler to fix this by doing it online, right? Send in your $250,000 to go to Columbia for 4 years, and we'll send you back the degree, and no one will have their time wasted. It would be much easier. It's very troubling. So, what would one do about this? Suppose one had a completely blank slate and said, I want to design a university for the 21st century, a globalized world which has problems that no single discipline will ever solve. And I'm going to be addressing students who are digital natives and growing up in a culture where multitasking is celebrated. So what would you do? Sort of amazingly to me, I found myself in that situation. With David Strangway, who had been president of the University of British Columbia, in 1998 retired and decided to take on as a retirement project setting up the first not-for-profit, private, independent liberal arts college in Canada. David had a very interesting history. He grew up as the son of missionaries in Angola for his entire childhood, went back to Canada to go to school, became a geophysicist, and then became the head geophysicist at NASA during the Apollo program. So he got to play with the moon rocks, one of the few people that got to play with moon rocks. He then went on to MIT, where he noticed that there were students coming from places like Swarthmore and Williams and Amherst and Dartmouth probably, who didn't have as many physics and geology courses as the students coming from Stanford and Berkeley and other places like that. But they always, or not always, but often ended up being the best graduate students, the most creative graduate students, the most articulate graduate students, the ones that came up with interesting new ideas. And so this got things going around in his head. He then went back to Canada, was provost of the University of Toronto, then president for 1 year, and then moved to UBC and elevated UBC from sort of a second-tier international university to a first-tier university over the course of 12 years of constant battles with faculty unions and students and support staff and everybody else. But he succeeded in doing this, and in the process completing the destruction of undergraduate education at the University of British Columbia, where the average class size for entering students is now 391, and you have a 3% chance of having a class with fewer than 100 students in it in your first year. He recognized this, and he thought back to the liberal arts colleges, and he thought, all right, that's what we're going to do. We're going to give Canada some change. In Canada, you may not know this, but it was pointed out, there are no private universities. In fact, the concept doesn't compute. The mayor of the town that our university is located in, a lawyer, someone with a law degree, had a big argument with me the first time we went out to dinner, insisting that I must be mistaken that Harvard, Yale, and Columbia must be public institutions, because by definition, a university is a public institution. There is a deep cultural divide. So putting a private institution in Canada, and then having a private not-for-profit university, that really freaks people out. I mean, if you're going to be private, why don't you make money? You know, anyway, this concept doesn't exist in Canada. So that's what he decided to do. He retired in 1998 from UBC, but was immediately named head of the Canadian Fund for Innovation, which was a project to distribute about $3.5 billion in funds to science research across Canada and raise Canada's research profile in the OECD. That made him a very popular person among scientists, as you can well imagine, but it delayed the start of this university. In 2002, the British Columbia legislature passed an act to create this university and made it distinctly different than all the other universities in Canada. And in 2004, a large donation was received by a single individual, which allowed the beginning of construction of the university, and the fall of 2007, we opened. What did we do? Well, let's first think about the structure of the university. As was mentioned, we didn't build it on a 19th century model, the way most universities are today. I'm not sure what those 19th century Germans were thinking about. I guess it was, well, we'll bring a lot of smart people together in a relatively small space and we'll see what happens. Maybe something interesting will happen. And of course it did. They built silos around themselves. The more energetic and aggressive ones built taller silos so they could throw rocks at the other silos down below. They mount raiding parties at night to steal the resources from the other silos. And we come up with the modern university. We thought perhaps that wasn't the best way to approach problems like the globalization of trade and climate change, which probably would require more than one silo's worth of people to fix. And so the first organizing principle of our university is we have no departments. We then poured that into the concrete by making the academic building circular, so you can't even sort of have departments, and we assign office by lottery. So people are sitting next to each other all around this building, 40 offices or so, and they're randomly located. That seemed like a good idea. And it turns out it's been a wonderful idea. The next thing you do is you want to think about what your goals are. Now, as I suggested earlier, I think universities today have too many goals to do them all successfully, so we decided we would just have one. We wanted to create the most effective and engaging education in the liberal arts and sciences for undergraduates. No graduate programs, no research institutes, no certificate programs, no engineering school, no business school, liberal arts and sciences school for undergraduates. And so that was our focus. We made one tiny little change to the normal functioning of a university, just a word. We don't call ourselves professors, we call ourselves tutors. Because we don't do what I'm doing now and standing here lecturing at you, professing. We, in fact, built that into the concrete as well, in that we have no lecture halls in the university. There's no room that looks like this. Every single classroom is a flat room with an oval table with 21 chairs. The CBC did a wonderful documentary on us a few months ago, and they called it 21 Chairs Around a Table. I just love it. And what the 21 chairs around a table mean is that you can never have more than 20 students in a class and one professor, although sometimes you have two professors, so you only have 19 students in the class. I think our record was 7 professors and 15 students in the class, which was 22 chairs, and we had to steal one from another classroom. But that was a really fun class. So we're tutors. We teach. We don't profess. And every class is an interactive seminar-style class. The next thing you want to ask is, how are you going to deliver the curriculum you come up with? And here I come back to my notions about multitasking. Most of your thinking is done with your prefrontal cortex. And it is well known that your prefrontal cortex is a serial processor, not a parallel processor. Yes, you can walk and breathe and think at the same time, but only one of those involves your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex processes information in a serial fashion. And therefore, multitasking is an unmitigated disaster if you're trying to educate someone and get them to think. Because distracting them means the brain switches off that task and moves on to another one. There was a beautiful program on PBS about a year ago where they had these Stanford computer science majors, real hotshot Stanford computer science majors. And they said, okay, we're going to give you this really hard test. They go, oh yeah, we're Stanford consumer stuff, we can do that. And they did it, and they put them in an isolation booth. And they ripped through this test, and they got almost perfect scores. Then they said, okay, we've got another test for you, since you did so well on that one. And it was the same level of test. But you can use your earbuds this time. And then the third time, they let them use their cell phones so they could text. And the fourth time, they let them have their laptops open. And their scores progressively went down from nearly perfect to about 58%. And then they asked them, they interviewed them at the end of this, and they said, see, I told you I could multitask. It doesn't make any difference to my performance. They didn't even recognize that they were performing at basically a failing level as opposed to an A+ level. So this, to me, is a problem. And therefore, in looking around, David Strangway came across Colorado College. Now, Colorado College is, to me, a truly remarkable institution. Because when it was almost 100 years old, in 1969, the faculty, some of the faculty, not all of them, said, this is boring, we should do something more interesting. And they invented the block system, which probably many of you know about. The block system means you take 4 courses over the course of a semester, but you take them serially rather than in parallel, the way your brain works. And so each course lasts approximately a month. We've adopted their calendar almost perfectly. You go to class from Monday to Friday, Monday to Friday, Monday to Friday, Monday to Wednesday, in an intensive, single-focused course, meeting a minimum of 3 and sometimes 24 hours a day, with the expectation of at least 5 hours of work outside of class. And then when you get to that final Wednesday, at 5 o'clock, everything stops. You're finished with that class. You get 4 days where no academic work is allowed. If you're teaching the next block, you can't say, oh yeah, you should read War and Peace before Monday. That's not allowed. You can not give assignments until 5 o'clock on Sunday evening. And then you start a new class. Now, I first heard about this, that they decided, by the time I got there, they decided they were going to adopt this block system. And I said, well, I can see how this would work in English. Because you could take a Shakespeare play, and you could read the history, and you could do the linguistics, you could even put on the play. You could really get deeply into it, it'd be terrific. But it won't work in physics. Because in physics, you have these cumulative ideas that you have to build one on top of the other. It takes time to assimilate them. You couldn't possibly cram it into 18 days. I'm therefore very amused now when I go back to Columbia and talk to my colleagues in the English department, and I enthuse about the block program, and they go, yeah, I see how this could work in science, but of course it would never work in English. That's an example of the standard academic conservatism. Academics have this reputation in our society and are pilloried for it of being incredibly, hopelessly out-of-touch liberals. But in fact, in my astrophysical explorations, I've discovered that university faculty are the most conservative species in the local universe. Not just on Earth, in the entire local universe, there are no more conservative people. Why is this? Because they know the system works. They came through this system. They came out the other end, and they're famous Ivy League professors now. So clearly, it's the ideal system. Failing to recognize that 99% of their students are not going to become Ivy League professors. Maybe 99.9% of them are not going to become Ivy League professors. And ignoring the mountains of research that shows that doing what I'm doing right now is a disaster if you want to actually communicate and get people to think and get people to collaborate and get people to learn. It's very curious. Academics treasure research. They love logical argument. And they willfully ignore and or dump on any research in pedagogy about the way people learn. Anyway, so I was skeptical about the block system, but I was willing to give it a try. And once I did, as with the other 31 full-time faculty at Quest, all of whom went through an undergraduate and graduate school in semesters, all of whom have taught at other institutions in semesters, and precisely zero of them will ever go back to teaching in another way. I'll give you just one example of how the block system works. All of our students, and I'll get to the content of our curriculum in a minute, have to take a math course in their first year. There's a couple of choices. They don't all have to take the same math course, but one of the choices is spherical trigonometry. Now, it's possible that we're the only university in North America that still teaches an entire course on spherical trigonometry. Your GPS wouldn't work without it, but in fact, it's just not taught anymore. But in the 19th century, this was a major intellectual development because spherical trigonometry meant doing trigonometry on the surface of a sphere, which is not the same as doing it on a flat plane. How many angles, how many degrees in a triangle on a flat plane? 180, very good. How many degrees in the triangle on the surface of a sphere? Well, Well, you all get numbers, right? And they're all right because the answer is undefined. Depends how big the triangle is and what the radius of the sphere is. So this is essential for accurate navigation. It's essential for accurate surveying. It was a big development in the 19th century. Nobody teaches it anymore. Fine. But one of our math pedagogues, and we have 3 of the best math pedagogues also in the local universe, one of them loves spherical trigonometry. He's taught this class at 3 other institutions. He's taught it half a dozen times. He has a book coming out with Princeton University Press in January on the history and development of spherical trigonometry. He knows this subject and he loves this subject. And somehow, when he walks into that classroom the first day with 15 or 16 first-year students, none of whom are going to be math majors, within hours, they all love spherical trigonometry too. He gets these little lucite spheres. They carry them around like pet rocks. They bring them to the cafeteria and they draw their little triangles on the sphere and they argue with each other. Last time he taught the class, which was a few months ago, I would go out. The class met from 10 to 12 and 1 to 2. I would go out at 7 o'clock at night. All the students were still in the classroom. Anyway, 2 Decembers ago, he was teaching this class. And at the end of the second week, he presented a theorem that had first been published in 1807 and had been reprinted in every textbook ever since. And these 16 first-year students, none of whom were going to be math majors, found a logical flaw in the proof of the theorem that had escaped mathematicians for 204 years and caused Glenn to have to pull his galley proofs from Princeton University Press so he could correct the error. That's the level of analytical ability you can develop in a block. And that's the level of engagement you get from the students in the block. It's extraordinary. It's different by about 2 orders of magnitude over the level you get in a classroom like this. I know, I've taught classes like this for 35 years. And I also actually have proven that I don't teach them anything. I did an experiment. I gave them a class. They worked really hard. They have quantitative problem sets, quantitative quizzes, quantitative exams. They got to the end of December. A lot of them got A's, because that's what we do at Columbia. You know, few of them got B's. Maybe one of them got a C. I don't know. Whatever. They all did really well in the exams. And then the following September, I brought them back. And I gave them a test. I bribed them with pizza. I've got like 60 out of the 80 of them back. I gave them a test. I gave the new students who had not yet given a single lecture to a test, and the results were statistically indistinguishable. They had paid their thousands and thousands of dollars, I guess, and been entertained by me for an entire semester and learned precisely nothing in this format. At Quest, I teach a class, 1.5 hours, half a class, on Minkowski diagrams in special relativity, how you can actually picture space and time being interrelated into a common space-time. I did that to students the first year we were open. The 4th year, they were the tour guides on campus. They would come to the sample classes I would give, and I'd use this as a sample class for visiting prospective students and their parents. And they didn't remember every detail, but they were right on it in helping people think about how you abstract the notion of space and time and put it on a 2-dimensional graph, because they'd learned the process of thinking. All right, so then there's the curriculum. What are we going to deliver in this? So I've convinced you, I'm sure, that the block system is the only way to go. What are we going to deliver on this block system in this circular building with no departments? Well, this is a mix of the old and the new. I still am a huge fan, despite its imbalance, of Columbia's core curriculum. I still think it's important that students read and think broadly before they choose what they're going to do. And so we have a 2-year foundation program. The entire first 2 years, 16 blocks, are all specified by us. They are a different mix than Columbia. They are 3 life science courses, 2 physical science courses plus a math course, 3 humanities courses, 3 social science courses, an arts course, and 2 interdisciplinary courses. The whole spectrum. And the point of those 18-day blocks that they march through is not to teach them a specific body of knowledge. It's not the image of pouring from my full pitcher into their empty little glasses. We have content of the courses. Obviously, you can't teach anything without having some content. But the content is more or less irrelevant, because the point of those courses is to teach them how an economist asks questions about the world and goes about trying to answer them. And how a political theorist does this, and how a literary critic does this, how a philosopher does this, and how a physicist does this. That's what they do for their whole first 2 years. Then, what do they do next? Well, we don't have any departments, so we don't have any majors. So now what are they going to do? Well, after specifying for them what we think they should learn in terms of the breadth of the perspectives they can bring to problems they will solve throughout their lives, learning to read critically, learning to write and to speak publicly effectively and persuasively. Every class has multiple times when every student has to get up and give a presentation to the class. Our second block is a rhetoric class where they learn to do that and to write effectively. It's time for them to take charge of their education. It's time for them to tell us what they're passionate about, what they want to pursue. And so each of them takes a month in either February or March of their second year when they've almost finished this curriculum and develops a question, a personal question. This question must be interdisciplinary in nature. They inevitably are naturally. It must involve experiential learning out in the real world, working in an NGO, working in a hospital, working in a research lab, working in a community organization, working in a business. It must involve the selection of a faculty mentor who will work with them for 2 years one-on-one, and the selection of half a dozen touchstone works, which they will read along with their advisor and dissect as fundamental to the question they're trying to answer, and must end in a project which they must present to the whole university at the end of April of their senior year. These projects can be something that looks almost like a master's thesis. Some of them do run to 100 pages and are very impressive indeed, but it doesn't have to be. Last year we had a full production of an original play, we had a graphic novel, and we've had a documentary film. So it just has to be something they present to everybody. What's interesting is, of course, they also have to select a bunch of courses they're going to take. And the courses we offer are sort of like second, third, fourth year courses you'd have at any university in physics and microeconomics and political philosophy and media and science. And yet each person coming to that class, where there is content because the tutor has an idea of what this class is going to be about, is enriched by the fact that each of them is coming from their own perspective. Let me give you an idea of some of what these questions are. Some of them are extremely broad. What is need? That was pretty broad. One of them was, is democracy a viable form of government to solve the problems of the 21st century? In Canada, it's a little less obvious what the answer is than in the United States. In the United States, it's really obvious the answer is no, but anyway. So that kind of question doesn't lead to an answer. You don't expect a 22-year-old to answer that question in 2 years, but it leads to an interest. It leads to a bunch of courses in media and in psychology and in politics and in economics. It leads to lots of interesting courses to which that person contributes from that perspective. But then it leads to something that you find that's interesting along the way. And in the case of this student, who's now in a graduate program in political philosophy, it led to a fascination with different voting systems other than first past the post, and how well they reflect the will in a democratic system. And so her big paper was on that. Some of the questions are much more specific. Another one of our first graduates, her question was, how do local cultural norms affect the delivery of public health services in developing countries? So what would you do? So she started off in a hazmat suit in the center of British Columbia collecting Lyme disease ticks and understanding vector-borne diseases by taking courses in epidemiology and biochemistry. She then went for 2 months to a Spanish language immersion class in Buenos Aires and stopped on the way back for the summer and spent over 3 months in Honduras and El Salvador at a rural and an urban health clinic independently, watching how centralized health services were being delivered and how local cultural norms were affecting them, and taking courses in cultural anthropology and sociology and things like that. And then her final project, which was just, I just love this. Her final project was to go to the Bolivian Amazon, where there'd been an outbreak of a particularly virulent form of hemorrhagic fever. It had something like a 20% mortality rate. And there was an outbreak and it was spreading. And so the World Health Organization, helicopters in some Western doctors to find out what's going on. And what they discovered was that the local shaman, for thousands of years, knew how to cure fever. He would rub rodents on your naked skin. And she's got pictures of them rubbing these big white rats on people's skin. Of course, the rats were the vectors for the hemorrhagic fever. And what she documented was the negotiation between the World Health Organization doctors and the local shaman to try to stop this epidemic by communicating, but not in a way that the jargon of the World Health Organization doctors did very well with the local shaman, but eventually was resolved. And she wrote a wonderful paper on this and now is in graduate school in social epidemiology. So these are the kinds of questions students come to. One of my favorites now, given the reference to food, is one of my students' questions. He just started his third year this year, is what is the perfect meal? Now you think, well, that's a pretty flaky question. What kind of school is this? Well, he's got a Venn diagram with the perfect meal in the middle, and it's got a cultural component, because of course that's a highly culturally dependent topic. It's got a food production and economic component. It's got a nutritional component, and it's got a neuroscience, aesthetics, philosophy component of aesthetics and what makes the perfect meal. And he's pursuing courses in those things. He's pursuing experiential learning, started his own business this summer, making homemade pies out of fresh local fruits. He's totally into this question, and he's already got all these graduate programs in food security and things like that picked out when he gets done with this question. The point is, the student can pursue something that's passionate, that they're passionate about, that allows them to bring to that passion the kinds of analytical skills they've learned from all these different foundation courses, and produce something which in some cases really are quite extraordinary. They're certainly at the level of master's theses. So that's the theory. What about the practice? How do we actually build this university? So I have this little slideshow, and it's what I give to prospective students. But I hope at least some of you are interested enough that you might actually come out to visit us at Quest, so I'll treat you all like prospective students, or maybe prospective faculty. Another brilliant advantage of the block program, is it's 18 days out of your life. So you don't have to have a semester to give up to go teach at some interesting new place. You just have to have 3.5 weeks. So this allows us to do things like bring in the Canadian ambassador to Mozambique to teach our international relations course, who in 30 years in the Foreign Service had never taught a university course because he can't take 4 months off, but he can take 3.5 weeks off. And the head of the Canadian Center for Human Health, Human Biosafety Lab to come and teach an epidemiology course. He can't leave all his graduate students and everything for months at a time, but he can leave them for 3.5 weeks. And he happens to be an avid rock climber, and we have the best rock climbing in North America, so it all worked out. But you can come for a month, and you can teach a course and try this out. So here's my advertisement for why you'd want to do that. So first you have to choose a location, and we found a pretty nice location. It's about 45 minutes north of Vancouver, usually rated the most livable city in the world, highly diverse, interesting city. And it's about 30 minutes from Whistler, which is always ranked as the best ski resort in North America, a little better than your hills here. He did it, okay. And then you have to build a campus. There's an interesting financial model about how this happened, which I won't bore you with, but we built a campus. And in that campus, you have to have things like an academic building. Here's our circular academic building. You walk all the way around. It's got a garden in the middle. And the classrooms are spaced around the outside. The top floor is all faculty offices. And then each classroom, because working with 15 other people, that can be hard, has 4 breakout rooms where you can send the students off in the course of a 3-hour class. You don't stand up and lecture for 3 hours. Quest students will not let you go more than 20 minutes before you're shouted down. So you think totally differently about teaching. You send them off into these breakout rooms where they work in groups of 3 or 4, and you circulate amongst them, keeping them on task, maybe each solving a different part of a complex science problem, each analyzing a different part of a political essay, each coming up with debating points to bring back to the class 45 minutes later. You need a place for them to eat, so you lose a lot of local wood and make a pretty place for them to eat. You need a place for them to study, so you lose even more local wood and you make a library. And we describe this education as intimate, integrated, and international. This is about what goes on. This is one of the little breakout rooms. So you've got your whiteboard, you've got your window, you've got your table and your 4 chairs. You've got your computers. Every student has to have a laptop. Sometimes you have them open, sometimes you have them closed. You decide. And you have a tutor there debating some point in a class, probably of democracy and justice, one of the foundation courses in the social sciences. It's integrated in that we take them out of the classroom as much as we can. Here they are about 1,000 kilometers north of us on the coast of BC, just south of Alaska, where the Great Bear Rainforest is, and they're at a whale research station working with these 2 whale researchers to monitor whale communication, because there's lots of whales up there in the summertime. And they're out there for 2 weeks at a time. Another advantage of the block system. You want to go on a field trip, you don't worry that they have a chemistry lab that afternoon or an English paper due the next day. If you're in marine biology, you can go out all day. If you're in astronomy, you can go out all night. If you're in international development, for example, you take the class to Belize for 3.5 weeks, which is what we did last February. If you're in volcanology, you take the class on a 5,000 kilometer road trip through the entire western part of North America, looking at all the volcanic structures that make up the geology of the land, which the students just got back from last Monday. And we're international. We currently have 36 countries represented in a student body of 430. So that's pretty diverse. Just about half Canadian, about a third from the US, and the rest from 34 other countries all over the world. Our first graduating class had 49 students. 2 were from Bhutan, so figure. We do things that are fun together, and we build community. We do the normal kinds of things that universities do. We play sports. It's interesting, the women's soccer team, we're talking at university 2 years ago, which had 200 students, so 100 women. The smallest university we play has 8,000, and we made it to the provincial finals the last 2 years in a row. We have a nice soccer field. As you can see, the setting's not bad. We distract the visiting team with the mountains. And then, of course, we're up against a provincial park right behind us, and it does snow there sometimes, and so the students go off and make sports of their own. The students are musical and cultural and artsy. They make films, they make photographs. You can go to our website and see some of the films. And again, these long extended field trips are possible because of the block system. Here they are looking for bears in the Great Bear Rainforest. They found a great bear. These are really big bears. And they even found the white bear. This is the symbol of our athletics team. It's a Kermode. It's a spirit bear. It's not a polar bear. It's a black bear, but it's not exactly albino, but it's a mutant, of which they're quite rare, but there's a number of them in this part of the world. And sometimes you just sit around and have lunch and relax. Again, the view's not too shabby. But apart from long field trips, if you're in ecology or marine biology or geology or any number of these things, including some social science courses, say to do with addiction and treatment, you go out every day. So you go out just around campus. We use the local environment and the local community, which has problems of its own, to put the students in the real world. This is a foundation course. It's not some fancy advanced ecology course. This is just a course that everybody takes. So everybody takes those waders out and learns how to do ecology in the field. Or they learn how to survey the river to determine whether or not the river's flow with a run-of-river project could power the electricity needs of the campus, an engineering report that they write. So here are the names of the courses we teach. The first one is called the Cornerstone. Our benefactor is also a geologist, so we have lots of stones in the titles of our courses. The Cornerstone is really an introduction to the level of work we expect at the university. It's an introduction to the block system, and it provides our first point on our self-evaluation system because we give them diagnostics in mathematics and quantitative reasoning, which are not the same thing, and in writing. We then next introduced rhetoric. We did not start with the program like this, but their writing was atrocious, their public speaking was worse, and we thought we can't sit through this many bad presentations, we better teach them how to do it. And so they all take rhetoric as their second block. And then they take the rest in any order they want to, except the question, which has to come in the spring of their second year. Then they go on and they take courses around their question. So these are called concentration blocks. They go into depth, 6 to 12 courses directly related to their question, a few electives. We have a non-native language requirement for all students, and all students must do experiential learning as part of their question from a block to a semester, and most of them do. One of my favorite statistics is in Canada, 2.6% of undergraduates study abroad. At Quest, it's 60%. They either are studying with one of our 10 partner universities in which we have a free no exchange of funds arrangement all over the world, or they're studying language in an immersion destination, which we strongly encourage rather than just taking classes on campus, or they are doing their experiential learning, working for some NGO in Kenya or working on a tea plantation in India. The things they come up with are really quite amazing. That's the faculty that does this. They don't look so different than you, maybe a little younger on average, I don't know. But you could fit in to that group. Well, I actually am teaching 3 courses this year, but I was not there when this picture was taken because I was having my hip replaced, which is why I'm limping around up here. On the left, you see the faculty on the first day of the block. They're really excited. On the right, you see the faculty on the end of the block when they're going off the deep end. We have students that work in laboratories. We have students that work in seminars. One of the classes, for example, is molecular biology. One version of this that everybody has to take. You walk in the first day, and he says, okay, down to the lab. You go down to the lab, take a cheek swab, and you have 18 days to do the full process of sequencing your mitochondrial DNA and determining which haplotype you belong to. That's all you do. You're in the lab the whole time, get a little information in the lab from the tutors, but that's what you're doing. You're going through the gel electrophoresis, you're looking for the little bands at the end, and maybe 30% of the students actually do it. They are ecstatic. They can tell which of the 64 haplotypes out of Africa they are. It's pretty neat. The rest of the students learn that science is hard, which is very important. We emphasize from day one that failure is the way you learn. Failure is not a problem in this system. If you fail a course, it means you weren't working. But if you fail on something in a course, it means you probably were working and you learned something from it. There's something else very important that we learned right off the bat, and it shows you a lot of the culture of the institution. In Canada, they give primarily merit-based scholarships, something that's anathema to me and probably most of you, where here we use our financial aid resources to give need-based scholarships, right? Well, since I'm the need-based scholarship side and I'm in Canada, we do the financially disastrous thing of doing both. So we give both merit-based scholarships and need-based scholarships. But in any event, the first year we gave out all this money in merit-based scholarships, and we thought, well, damn it, those students really better do well. They got to maintain a 3.5 or we're going to yank that scholarship away from them. And within 2 months, we had exactly what we were trying to avoid, which is consciousness of grades. Oh, but David, if you gave me a B minus instead of a B, instead of a C plus, I would have not lost my scholarship. So, on a student initiative, we changed the system. You don't have to maintain any average now to maintain your scholarship. But in every class you take, and that means once a block, you get a grade. Under that grade, there's a little checkbox, and it says, by the tutor, this student is gaining from and contributing to the intellectual environment in my classroom. Yes or no? And you have to get a minimum of 6 out of 8 yeses to remain in the university. 10 people didn't last year, and they're gone. Okay. One person who was an A student didn't last year, and he's gone. Because in this environment, the students recognize, and we recognize, that it's absolutely crucial that those 15 or 18 or 19 students in your classroom are all engaged, because their mutual learning depends on it. Half of the work, approximately, is collaborative. Of course, you have to read books yourself, you have to write your own papers, but presentations, research projects, problem sets are often done either in pairs or in triplets or in quads. Something else that's amazing about this group. You know how when you give a lecture, people come in the first day and they pick a seat, and then they always come back to the same seat, right? Well, our students never do that. They come in every day, and there's 5 days a week, right? And they sit in a different seat. And the reason is because one day I'll go, okay, you two, you two, you two, you two. One day I'll go count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The ones goes together, the threes goes together. They know they can't beat my system, right? So they just sit with different people, and they learn different things. And they work in different groups, and they learn group dynamics and collaborative learning. So, what are the results? Stole my thunder, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The National Survey of Student Engagement is an instrument developed in 1999 by the School of Education at Indiana University, and has been taken by almost 2,000 schools in Canada and the US. Rather than being a student opinion survey, did you like your education? Do you like the food in the cafeteria? Are your faculty members hot or whatever? Instead of that, well, that's a big thing on Rate Your Professor, in case you hadn't looked. You might check yourself out. Instead of asking their opinions, it asks what they do. It's a 110-question survey. How many hours do you spend per week discussing classroom work with your classmates outside of class? How many pages of papers have you written? How many hours have you spent talking to your professor? Actually, that's a good one. Usually it says, how many times have you met your professor this semester? 0, 1, 2, or more than 2. And our students sort of go, huh? You know, like every day? Where does that fit on the graph? Anyway, so there's 110 questions about what they do. And then they amalgamate these in a statistically weighted way to measure 5 things about the quality of undergraduate education: the level of academic challenge that the students face, the amount of active and collaborative learning rather than the passive learning you're doing right now or not, the number of enriching educational experiences either inside or outside of the classroom, the intensity of the student-faculty interaction, and the degree to which the campus environment as a whole supports the intellectual purpose of the campus. And so we took this for the first time 3 years ago, not knowing how we do, thinking our students are pretty engaged, so it would probably be okay. And here are the results. So there's 67 other Canadian institutions, and the top bar is us, and it looks like we won on academic challenge, and it looks like we won on student-faculty interaction, and it looks like we won on active and collaborative learning. It's not really nearly this close, because 94% of Quest students answer this survey, and that means it's a reflection of the experience of the total student body. The average for the rest of these schools is 32%. the 32 most engaged percent who will fill out a 110 question survey for no grade and no money. And so divide all those other bars by 3. Enriching educational experiences and a supportive campus environment. This is just for the Canadian schools. In fact, USA Today collected the results from 2009 and 2010 from 740 American schools, and we were #1 in North America the first time we took this test. Needless to say, we signed up again. And so the next year, our scores increased, and the average in Canada decreased. And this year, we just got our results last week, 2 weeks ago, and our results increased again. That is, we're getting better. Same questions, different students. Just first years and fourth years are asked. And so that's some kind of external validation. We are still way behind on our internal validation, on what have our students learned. We're doing the CLA, what does it stand for? Collegiate Learning Assessment, yeah. We're doing that this spring for the first time. We do have these benchmarks where we have Cornerstone diagnostics, we then come back to them in the question and then back to them in the Keystone project, another stone, the last class they take, but they're so far mostly qualitative and we want some more quantitative measures. So we're working on that, but you know, I know why people don't start universities all the time now, because it's really hard, and some things you just don't get to, like assessment, which we should. Anyway, what we specialize is in taking a group of people like this and turning them to a group of people that looks like this. That's our first graduating class. They are off to the Peace Corps, they're off to law school, they're off to graduate programs in epidemiology and physical anthropology at Stanford. They're off doing lots of interesting things. I suspect roughly half of them will go to graduate school within 2 years of graduation. The other half, or professional school, the other half may eventually or may not. But all of them, we think, we have prepared to be articulate, persuasive speakers and writers, people who are instinctively collaborative, who are naturally look at problems from different disciplines, and who are aware of their global and their local community. Yesterday, one of our mathematicians was giving a talk on how teaching mathematics at Quest had changed his view of mathematics, and he used this quote from Henri Poincaré: "The task of the educator is to make the child's spirit pass again where the forefathers have gone, moving rapidly through certain stages, but suppressing none of them." And I guess that's sort of our goal as well. So we built this campus, and we've built more than a campus now. We've built an institution. It's a very nice place to visit, and I welcome all of you who are interested to do so. Thank you very much.